as it were. So anything goes for that effect. Spiral effect, scratching. That's interesting. See, so you get some of the colours, even of the original painting below. Going back to the neo-expressionists, basically George Baselitz, Anselm Kiefer, Francesco Clemente, Julian Schnabel, and one painter which I consider to be, or who I consider to be a neo-expressionist, and he's not in any of the books, is the guy from Mallorca, Miquel Barceló, one of my favourite painters ever, who's influenced my work hugely. I consider him to be a neo-expressionist, and he uses all these sorts of different materials. And I've forgotten one thing. I got carried away and I've forgotten one thing, but it can be added now. Sand. Just realised this could look nice with a bit of sand, so I'll probably add it now. What I want to do now, the painting I've got in my head, and like I said before, my hard drive, is an image that's been there for a long time. The first idea for that painting came about from Henry Moores, a sculptor, brilliant British sculptor from the 1920s, who did some wonderful drawings of the London Underground during the war. People sleeping in the underground, and you could see this tunnel effect, and I loved the effect it created. So that I stored ages ago in my head for whatever reason. I liked that image. And then also some of Miquel Barceló's work greatly reminds me of that sort of tunnel effect. You can see the tunnel already happening there. Now, if we leave this to dry as is, those grooves will remain there and will add to the effect of the painting. Because I've thought about the sand, I've actually, before we carry on, I'm going to use it. Sand from Eastern Beach, actually. And, you know, again, these guys used materials like sand. Anselm Kiefer used sand, used clay, whatever. So I'm going to just use this to add to the spirally effect. Most of this will be covered anyway with the paint, but it will just add to the texture. And even spread it out with a brush. No problem you end up with more in one edge or whatever. All this will be covered with a brush in the end. It's already looking a bit like a cake. But I like the texture of this sand. It's quite thickish. Now ideally this should have been dried before I started this sort of next stage. Normally I would have given this a couple of days and then started painting. But, you know, you have to do with what there is, and because it's neo-expressionism, again, it doesn't really matter much. But that messy stickiness might add to the effect, but it's going to make it harder for me. Anyway, going back to what I was saying earlier on, the idea for this painting came from a book I read when I was 18. It was a book that greatly changed my life. It was called Doors of Perception, Heaven and Hell. A book by a guy called Aldous Huxley. And actually a bit of trivia here. Those of you my age or thereabouts will know the band The Doors, Jim Morrison and The Doors. They actually got their name, The Doors, from that book, Doors of Perception. Let's get now a bit philosophical, and at the end of the day, painting, or painters or artists, have to be like philosophers, modern day philosophers. And you know, whatever one does should always be like a sort of a mirror thrust in the face of society. Show your deficiencies and or you know, problems within the society. Anyway, Aldous Huxley, when he was writing this book, he was experimenting with hallucinogenic drugs and mescaline in particular. And the book was about different states of consciousness, of awareness. Going back to The Doors, there's a song by The Doors called Break On Through to the Other Side, which basically deals with that. Doors of perception, different ways of perceiving things. So you break on through, you break on to the other side of awareness. It's getting deep now. But I like that idea. And again, one can apply it to anything. Obviously, drugs and different state of consciousness from life to death, the transitionary period from life to death. I mean, this painting could also be interpreted as what people who've died and come back have always said. You know, it's like a tunnel. So that's the effect I'm after. And it's about that, doors of perception and going into a different state of consciousness. So now what I'm after is that sort of tunnel effect. Because ideally, and these neo-expressionists, they brought back the human figure into painting, and I am going to do the same. I want to incorporate a sort of humanoid-looking figure into the painting. So it's like how one goes from one state of consciousness to the next. So I will have a figure in the end, but I'll put that in right at the end, and I'll show you how I do that. Now it's beginning to come together. Now I want to go to the light source, which is this, and every time I do a powerful light source like this, I always remember the person I consider to be the real father, or the first abstract painter of all time, William Turner. I mean, this guy was working in the 1800s, I can't remember now, but well before abstract was even conceived. And if you see his sunsets and his suns, they're like a really potent source of light, which is somewhere around there. So now, I mean, I love the gooiness of that paint. This is one where one enjoys painting, where you get into the materials, you start enjoying the gooiness, the mess, no problem. Like I always say, if you drip paint or if you have fun, and art has to be cathartic. It has to be. I always compare art to going to the loo. It's quite a strange thing, but at the end of the day, when you go to the loo, you get rid of waste, body waste. Art gets rid of mental waste. Anything that's in there that shouldn't be there, that's wrong, I get rid of it, and it's cathartic, and it helps me keep a clean sort of spirit, as it were. It is spiritual. Art is very spiritual, or it has to be. Mind you, there are different ways of art. Art can also be decorative, and then you just don't really think about anything else, and just doing a pretty painting. That's beginning to come together now. It's beginning to get interesting. I don't know whether the camera can pick up the texture and all the, you know, the effects, the sand mixing with the pigment and the paint and the art text. And now I'll probably go back to scratching again. But that's looking really interesting now. I think it's going to need another color. Hold on, let me just quickly go back to the scratching method. Sin miedo otra vez. So we don't forget what we're doing. Like concentric circles, spiral. There used to be, now we're going back. I remember there used to be a program called Time Travel ages ago, or Land of the Giants. And I remember when these people were traveling in time in that program, they had this cheap and nasty effect of spiraling circles, or was it Batman? And they were like really strange, awkward looking spiraling circles. That's the effect I'm after. I love scratching it. You really get into the material there. See, you get those grooves. And when this dries and you give it a nice coat of varnish, it looks a treat. Now I'm going to add a bit of black. But at the end of the, oh, that's interesting. See, black mixing with the yellows already creating a different colour altogether. I want the black because at the end of the day, in a tunnel, you're bound to get some darkness. So, and I also think this requires some sort of blue, a dark Prussian blue. But look at my carefree attitude. Even when I put the painting on, it will be mixed on the canvas. A lot of teachers will tell you, never mix on the canvas, mix on the palette. Well, I say all rules are meant to be broken, and I mix on the canvas. So I'm sorry if you don't like that, but in my case it works. See, now we're getting to get that sort of wavy effect. And this you just keep on going and going until, I mean, even dripping paint. I might go back to my usual dripping paint in the end. A la Pollock, yeah. When this dries, it's going to be very interesting. Now this area should be quite dark. Now some people are seeing those drips, ya se lo cargó. No,